The macabre history of the Harpers. Their children grew up believing they were the chosen one too. In the remote hills of eastern Montana, where the nearest neighbor lived 15 miles away and the closest town was a mere dot on the horizon, stood a compound that the outside world would never see. Behind tall wooden fences and dense pine trees, the Harper family had built their own universe, one governed by prophecy, fear, and absolute control. Robert and Margaret Harper weren't always religious extremists. In the early 1980s, they were ordinary citizens living in suburban Denver. Robert worked as an accountant, Margaret as a nurse. But something changed after their third child was born. Robert began experiencing what he called divine visions, messages from God warning of an impending apocalypse that would cleanse the world of the unworthy dot. By 1985, the Harpers had sold everything they owned and moved to Montana, purchasing 200 acres of isolated land with cash. They built their compound with their own hands, a main house, several smaller buildings, and a chapel where daily prayers would become the cornerstone of their children's existence. The Harper children never knew birthdays as celebrations. Instead, each birth was marked as another step toward fulfilling God's plan. By 1995, Margaret had given birth to 12 children, 6 boys and 6 girls. According to Robert's increasingly elaborate theology, this was no coincidence. The number 12 was sacred. 12 apostles, 12 tribes of Israel, and now 12 chosen children who would lead humanity's survivors after the Great Cleansing. The children's education consisted entirely of religious instruction, basic survival skills, and preparation for their divine mission. They learned to read using only the Bible and Robert's own writings, which he called the New Revelations. Mathematics was taught through calculating food rations for the post-apocalyptic world. Science was dismissed as Satan's deception, designed to lead humanity away from God's truth. Each child was assigned a specific role in the coming New World Order. The eldest son, Joshua, was designated as the future spiritual leader. The eldest daughter, Ruth, would oversee the re-education of survivors. The younger children were given roles as healers, teachers, warriors, and keepers of the sacred knowledge that would rebuild civilization. The compound operated on a strict schedule that began at dawn with communal prayer and ended past midnight with individual confession sessions. The children worked the land, tended livestock, and spent hours in meditation, preparing their souls for the weight of their future responsibilities. Physical punishment was swift and severe for any deviation from the established order. Contact with the outside world was forbidden and unnecessary. Robert had convinced his children that beyond their borders lay a corrupt and dying society, poisoned by technology, materialism, and moral decay. Television, radio, newspapers, all were tools of Satan designed to corrupt the pure minds of the chosen ones. As the children grew older, some began to question the constant delays in the prophesied apocalypse. Robert's predictions had specific dates: first 1995, then 2000, then 2005. Each failed prophecy was explained as God testing their faith or humanity receiving a temporary reprieve due to the Harper family's prayers and preparations. The isolation wasn't just physical, it was psychological. The children developed their own language for concepts that didn't exist in their world. The outside became synonymous with evil and temptation. The waiting referred to their current state of preparation. The calling would be the moment when God summoned them to fulfill their destiny. Margaret, once a trained nurse who had saved lives, became increasingly detached from reality as the years passed. She stopped questioning Robert's visions and began having her own, often involving detailed instructions about their children's future roles and the specific ways the world would end. She would spend hours in trances, speaking in tongues, and delivering messages that Robert would carefully transcribe and add to their growing collection of sacred texts. By 2010, the Harper children ranged in age from 15 to 25. Yet none had ever spoken to anyone outside their family. They knew nothing of popular culture, current events, or technological advances. Their understanding of geography came from Bible maps. Their knowledge of history ended with Robert's interpretation of biblical prophecy. The compound had become entirely self-sufficient. They grew their own food, raised their own livestock, and generated their own power through solar panels and a small wind turbine technologies Robert justified as necessary tools for surviving the coming collapse, not as contradictions to his anti-technology stance. But cracks were beginning to show in the foundation of their isolated world. The eldest children were reaching ages where, in the outside world, they would be starting careers, forming relationships, and building independent lives. Instead, they remained trapped in eternal childhood, waiting for a calling that never came, and preparing for a future that existed only in their father's increasingly paranoid mind. The first sign of real trouble came when Joshua, the designated spiritual leader, began experiencing what he called different visions, not of apocalypse and divine mission, but of doubt, questions, and an inexplicable longing for something he couldn't name. These visions terrified him because they contradicted everything he had been taught to believe about himself and his purpose. The end of the Harper family's isolated world didn't come with the apocalypse Robert had spent decades predicting. It came with a knock on their door in March 2015, the first time in 30 years that an outsider had set foot on their property. A Montana state social worker, accompanied by 2 sheriff's deputies, arrived following an anonymous tip from a postal worker who had noticed that the family's mail consisted entirely of packages from survivalist catalogs and religious publications, with no evidence of the children's existence in any official records. None of the Harper children had birth certificates, social security numbers, or any documentation proving they existed. The confrontation was brief but devastating. Robert Harper, faced with authorities he had taught his children were agents of Satan, suffered what witnesses describe as a complete psychological breakdown. Margaret retreated into catatonic silence. The 12 children, ranging in age from 20 to 30, emerged from their buildings like ghosts from another century. What authorities discovered at the compound defied comprehension. Rooms filled with handwritten prophecies covering every inch of the walls. Detailed maps of the post-apocalyptic world the children would inherit. Survival supplies stockpiled for a disaster that existed only in Robert's mind. And most disturbing of all, detailed files on each child documenting their training, their assigned roles, and Robert's assessment of their readiness to fulfill their divine purpose. The integration process was unlike anything social services had ever encountered. The Harper children weren't just isolated, they were functionally alien to their own society. Simple concepts like personal choice, individual desires, or life goals were completely foreign to them. They had never made a decision for themselves, never expressed a personal preference, never imagined a future different from the one prescribed by their father's visions. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the psychologist assigned to work with the family, later described the initial interviews as heartbreaking beyond description. The children spoke in a mixture of biblical language and the specialized vocabulary they had developed in isolation. They couldn't understand why the apocalypse hadn't come, why their father's prophecies had failed, or what their purpose could possibly be in a world that continued to exist contrary to everything they had been taught. The eldest, Joshua, experienced what psychiatrists termed a complete identity crisis. His entire sense of self was built around being a future spiritual leader of humanity's remnant. Faced with the reality that no remnant existed and no leadership was needed, he spent months in a catatonic state similar to his mother's, unable to process the complete dissolution of his life's meaning. Ruth, who had been trained to re-educate apocalypse survivors, discovered that she herself needed to be educated about basic aspects of modern life. At age 28, she encountered television for the first time. learned that women could vote and work outside the home, and discovered that the world contained billions of people living normal lives, not the few thousand corrupted souls she had been taught existed in the outside. The younger children adapted more quickly, but their psychological scars ran deep. They had been raised believing they were special, chosen, destined for greatness. Learning that they were victims of their parents' delusions left them feeling not just deceived, but fundamentally worthless. If they weren't the chosen ones, then who were they? If their purpose had been a lie, what was their real purpose? Medical examinations revealed the physical toll of their upbringing. Years of inadequate nutrition, lack of proper medical care, and the stress of constant psychological pressure had left lasting damage. Several children showed signs of developmental delays. Others had untreated medical conditions that had been dismissed as tests of faith or purification through suffering. The legal proceedings were complex and unprecedented. Robert Harper was charged with child abuse, kidnapping, and fraud. Margaret was deemed mentally incompetent to stand trial. The children, all legal adults, had to make their first independent decisions, whether to testify against their parents and what kind of life they wanted to build from the ruins of their shattered beliefs. Some chose to maintain contact with their parents, unable to completely sever the bonds that had defined their entire existence. Others cut all ties, desperate to escape any reminder of their stolen childhoods. A few attempted to maintain some version of their religious beliefs, adapting their father's teachings to fit the reality of the world they now found themselves in. The process of learning to live in normal society took years. Simple tasks like grocery shopping, using public transportation, or having casual conversations with strangers required extensive therapy and support. Many struggled with depression, anxiety, and a persistent feeling that they didn't belong anywhere too. Damaged for normal society, but unable to return to the world of their childhood. By 2020, 5 years after their liberation, the Harper children had scattered across the country. Some had found stable employment and were attempting to build normal lives. Others continued to struggle with addiction, mental illness, and the inability to form healthy relationships. A few had become advocates for other victims of religious extremism, using their experiences to help identify and prevent similar cases of spiritual abuse. The Harper compound still stands in the Montana hills, now empty and slowly being reclaimed by nature. Local authorities use it as a training facility for recognizing signs of family isolation and religious extremism. The buildings that once housed a family convinced of their divine mission now serve as a reminder of how easily belief can be twisted into control, and how the promise of spiritual purpose can become a prison that spans generations. The story of the Harper family raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of belief, the power of isolation, and the responsibility of society to protect children from their parents' delusions. Their children, now in their 30s and 40s, continue to grapple with fundamental questions about identity, purpose, and healing that most people never have to face. What began as a tale of spiritual purpose had indeed spiraled into one of control, deception, and shattered identities. But perhaps most tragically, it became a story of time that could never be recovered and childhoods that could never be returned. The Harper children weren't chosen for any divine purpose, but they were chosen for something else entirely, to serve as a stark reminder of what happens when the power of belief is corrupted by the desperate human need to feel special, important, and chosen in a world that often feels random and meaningless. Their legacy isn't the spiritual leadership their father promised, but something perhaps more valuable: a warning about the dangerous intersection of isolation, extremism, and the vulnerable minds of children who trust the adults meant to protect them. Thank you for watching another tale unfold here on NW Storytime. Every story hides a secret, and tonight you uncovered another one. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us keep the secrets alive. Until next time, stay curious